Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. I am naturopath Fiona Chin, and I am joined today by the beautiful Emily Cahill. And I'm going to have to introduce him because he's going to annoy me the whole time. Emily, I'm coming back to your introduction, but I'm also joined by Hugo here. Yes. Hugo is staring at me and is going to be our message if he goes as I'm having to pat him the entire time as we go through. So I'm also joined by the beautiful Emily. If you've not met Emily before, Emily is a registered nurse. She works in a large cardiovascular clinic in Melbourne, Australia. She's also a fully qualified naturopath. She is our trained kidney coach consultant. So she's a naturopath on our team, or we've got a couple of naturopaths that work with us, but Emily's the one that will, if people have done the kidney disease solution and they want to tweak the program, or they're a bit unsure about what they can be doing to maximise it, or which driver to treat first, then they can reach out and have a consult with Emily and she'll refine that program for people, which is a great thing to have. She also writes the blogs with me now. So I can say now that I write blogs too, Emily, because I'm like writing half of them now. So at least I can say pull my finger out there. And she also does all our Facebook posts and answers most of our Facebook comments, along with Rachel, our naturopath. So Emily, thank you for joining me again today. So we thought today we'd talk about heavy metals. So why don't we do a bit of an overview of what a heavy metal is and where it comes from, and whether it's something actually people have to worry about, or whether it's a really rare thing if people have exposure or potentially high levels, and just dig in from there.
So heavy metals are basically present everywhere. So they're naturally present in the earth. So some heavy metals are naturally present in the earth. And then they're also used in things like agriculture or medicine and different type of industries. Mm-hmm. There's different, I guess, classes of heavy metals, because some things that are classed as a heavy metal are also minerals that our body needs. So I guess you can, divide them up into, the potentially more damaging types of heavy metals. So things like copper, chromium, zinc, which are all also necessary for the body, are classified as heavy metals. But I guess when people are talking about the detrimental effects of heavy metals, yes, all of those things can be detrimental if they're in high amounts, but we're particularly thinking about things like arsenic or lead, mercury or cadmium. So those sort of things that aren't naturally supposed to be present in the body, and don't have a beneficial effect in the body. So I think there's people don't realize how ubiquitous, I guess, heavy metals are in our environment. We've got large amounts of them that are, produced as industrial waste and used in agriculture. And the thing about them is that they're not biodegradable. So what that means is that they don't, break down in the environment. So the build-up over time, gets higher and higher as more heavy metals are used and, more become, present in the environment as well. So they're in everything from our soil to our water. They're in our food chain as well for that reason. Mm. And then I guess there's the more common areas that people would probably think about heavy metals when they're used by factories and, runoff from factories and all of those sorts of things also are sources of heavy metals.
And what are the ones, I think you mentioned some of them there, but there are a couple there that really can be quite problematic in things like kidney disease. What are those big ones that you think people should, I know you mentioned them, but we'll go over those. They're quite specific to kidney disease.
Yeah, so probably the four that I guess are more problematic to the kidneys and other organs as well would be cadmium. That's a really big one for kidney disease. Then mercury as well, lead and arsenic would probably be my top four that you would be wanting to look out for.
So what are some common, and cadmium is the one that I see a lot of, but what are the common I know you sort of went over a big overview, but let's go into those four. So what's the word I'm looking for? Sources of cadmium and arsenic and mercury and lead. What sort of are the really most common contaminators or things that will pass on a heavy metal to a patient or a person?
So cadmium is in a lot of our grains and vegetables because of soil being contaminated. Then another large, I guess, potential exposure of cadmium is cigarette smoke. Cigarettes contain cadmium, so that's definitely an exposure. And then it's also used in various different plastic industries, batteries, and metals as well. So there's also that sort of, I guess, either occupational exposure or the runoff of that from those sort of industries. Leaded petrol was a really large source of lead, which has been banned in a lot of countries, not all. Would definitely be, and lead paint as well. And again, most countries have banned the use of paint with lead in it, but it's still present in older houses and things like that. So it's definitely still around. Ceramics as well, battery manufacturing, those sorts of things as well for lead. Then thinking about arsenic, that's more so we get arsenic, it's in the environment. So as a flow-on from volcanoes or wells, anything like that is a potential source of arsenic. Again, food. We have arsenic in our food chain as well. And the last one, mercury. So probably a couple of the big potential exposures is mercury fillings. So for people who've got fillings made of mercury, that is a large source of exposure. And then also seafood and fish as well, from mercury being in our waterways. Then it gets into our fish, and then we obviously then eat them. So that's another potential source. Some batteries, it's used in car industries, some metal processing. So more of those kind of industry type areas.
Yeah. And let's go through symptoms. So, if someone's like, oh, maybe I have had exposure to, especially the arsenic that's like in half our food, like what are sort of symptoms that people could be thinking about if they're thinking, oh, maybe I have had an exposure?
It's really tricky because there's sort of acute exposure or acute toxicity, which is less common, and that tends to happen when you've been exposed to a large amount of a heavy metal in, a short period of time. So in a factory accident or something like that, then those symptoms can come on quite quickly, and are a bit easier to spot. But things like nausea, vomiting, confusion, pain, liver failure, kidney failure as well for acute toxicity. With chronic exposure, it's a bit more tricky because often it's been, sort of low-grade exposure over time, which then causes these really sort of non-specific type symptoms that people can't really put a start date on, and they often get attributed to, various other health problems or various other diseases. So, got everything from confusion, changes with memory, depression, numbness or tingling in parts of the body, fatigue, problems with your thyroid, problems with your digestive function, problems with your immune system, and as well talking about kidney disease, just and what can potentially be, sort of a slower and just, loss of kidney function or a reduction in kidney function. That, again, because there's often people aren't aware of what they're being exposed to, heavy metals are often not thought of when you're looking at, I guess, what's causing any of these symptoms, including what's causing reduction in kidney function.
Yeah, exactly. So how do people test for heavy metals? Because it's not one that obviously your local GP is running for people, and that's probably because of the type of test. But what is the most, for the big four that we're talking about in kidney disease that, can lead to kidney disease and be problematic? What's the best way of running those tests to get an accurate level if there's heavy metals in the body?
So again, there's no sort of one perfect test for heavy metals, because one of the problems is that they get stored in the body. So they get stored in organs. So what that means is that, doing like a blood test or a urine test won't necessarily always show you that you've been exposed, but they're probably two of the more common. Blood tests generally are used more so looking at more sort of acute exposure, because what happens in the body is if you do have heavy metals in the blood, the body will try to remove it and it'll store it in other places. So it'll try to get it out of the bloodstream, but it can be detected, particularly if it's ongoing exposure on a blood test. Then, probably the other most common way would be through urine testing as well. So checking the levels of heavy metals in the urine can give a bit of an indication of sort of body load and exposure as well. Hair testing is used too with heavy metals. Again, that's only really looking at exposure kind of over a period of sort of weeks as well. But it's a tricky thing to test for because of the way the body stores the heavy metals, which is then why they become problematic. So, I guess any one of those tests, or sometimes a combination, are used, blood test and urine test.
Yeah.
To get an idea.
I know that's what I generally do, is I do hair and then I urine, especially as I start treating, because you obviously want to make sure that the levels will go up as you start treating, because you'll clear more and then they should start dropping down again. So it gives you a good idea if your treatment's working. Now, with heavy metals, so say someone goes and has a test. Actually, I want to come back to this first. Oligoscans, know much about those?
No.
Are there an energy scan for heavy metals? I was going to see if you had an opinion on that.
Oh, I do have, yes, I do have some clients who've, use those.
And what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I can't say I've looked into it very closely, but for me, my preference would be testing using the measures that we had already spoken about, just because those tests are the ones that have been shown to give an indication of heavy metals, and more, I guess, accurate indication.
Fair enough. I'll leave it at that. Surprisingly, I've had them done on patients and they at least consistently showed the same levels. So, but that's hard to know whether I have then to go back and check against urine, and they are quite different. So, I'm not sure. But over time, the scans look good, but that computer knows that. So it's got the information of previous scans. So I can't say that was completely non-biased. So that's my experience with it. So someone has a test and they come back and they're positive. Do you treat all heavy metals the same? Is there different protocols for different heavy metals? Well, what are we going to do if we've got a positive or someone where we go, well, they've got heavy metals, they've got kidney disease, we don't want them. Actually, I've got a two-pronged question there. It's like, with kidney disease, can you chelate and treat? And how do you treat? Are we treating them all the same, or do you do slightly differently for each metal?
Yes, slightly differently for each metal, because for one, different metals have different affinity for areas in the body, and so the way that the body needs to be protected as well while you're chelating can be slightly different, as well as different chelating agents have different affinity for, I guess, different heavy metals as well.
So let's go. Sorry, I interrupt. You were going to keep going, so I'll be quiet.
No, that's all right. And I was just going to, answer the second part of someone with kidney disease. Can you chelate? Do you chelate? There's, there are quite a few studies actually about looking at chelation in people with kidney disease who have had high levels of heavy metal and the improvement in kidney function following chelation. So yes, you can.
So you wouldn't be worried about overburdening a already declined kidney function if you did chelation properly?
You'd have to, take someone, you'd obviously take someone's kidney function into account as to how quickly or aggressively potentially that you would do any chelation.
And walk us through chelation. So I know you said there's a couple of different agents and, different chelating agents bind to different heavy metals. Let's take, I think the ones people most worried about are probably cadmium. So let's start with that. How would give me a bit of an overview of how you would treat or what you would do if someone came back with high cadmium exposure?
So cadmium is stored largely in the kidneys. So that's firstly something to be aware about. And, I guess part of the protocol, because one of the things that happens because heavy metals are stored within organs in the body is that as they are being chelated, which just means that something's sort of binding and pulling them out, we also need to make sure that we're not causing more potential damage as well, because, I guess one of the reasons why our body stores these heavy metals is to try to, reduce the damage that it causes within the body.
Yeah.
So definitely wanting to make sure that someone is able to detoxify well as a starting point, because that's one of the the issues, and one of the reasons why heavy metals can build up is a reduction in being able to detoxify what we're naturally being exposed to. So heavy metals are often, high levels of heavy metals are either because you've had a high level of exposure, so you've been exposed to a lot of them, and or your body just isn't able to deal with the exposure that you of what you have been exposed to, which means that you don't necessarily have to be exposed to high levels, but if you're not able to clear things properly through your gut, through your kidneys, through all of your elimination, then that's when we're going to get a higher buildup. So I guess a big part of it is protecting the rest of the body whilst doing any chelation, so that we're not getting the heavy metals just moving from one organ to the other.
Yes, which definitely can happen. Okay, so that was cadmium. And then did you give us some agents? What are you using?
So I use a lot of, antioxidant type agents. I guess that's the other thing to say about chelation is chelating using natural agents or chelating using, chelating agents as well. So there is a difference there. But using, looking more so at natural medicine, things like N-acetylcysteine, which isn't just an antioxidant and doesn't just help with removing heavy metals, but is also super protective to the kidneys at the same time. So alpha lipoic acid as well, again, really another really important antioxidant, which can help to chelate and get rid of heavy metals while protecting the body from any potential sort of further damage or exposure.
Yeah, and that's actually why we put N-acetylcysteine into the Kidney Advance, was because of its amazing ability to protect against things like heavy metal and how protective it is to kidneys from any sort of toxic damage. N-acetylcysteine is just amazing at how that protects the kidneys and flushes it out. There's so much good research on how that works. Now, let's go and talk a bit about mercury, because that's probably the heavy metal that you see that's most known about and has, probably the most research behind it. And it seems to be reducing now because we're not using amalgams, the mercury fillings anymore. But obviously our ocean and our seafood is a really high source of that. So what are you doing if someone's got an elevated mercury urine and blood test?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, using similar type agents as well as, I mentioned earlier that some forms of heavy metals are things like our minerals as well. So zinc and copper and selenium. One of the things that heavy metals does is it takes the place of some of these nutrients within the body. So we can also use that to our advantage, where we use those things like selenium or, zinc and things like that to actually kind of help with offsetting the potential toxicity of heavy metals. But again, it would be using antioxidants, working on the gut too, because a large amount of our mercury exposure, obviously different if you've got mercury fillings, but because a lot of it is from our food supply, then also working with the gut can reduce the absorption of what we're getting in our foods too.
Yeah.
So making sure that, things like fiber as well can actually bind to heavy metals and help with the elimination from the body.
And we're always on about prevention better than cure. What are some things that people can do to make sure that they're minimising their exposure to things like heavy metals, but specifically like cadmium and mercury, arsenic and lead?
Yeah. So I spoke about earlier some of their kind of typical exposures. So obviously, the best thing to do is try to limit where we're being exposed to heavy metals. It's impossible to completely avoid them. So we want to sort of limit exposure where we can, and then working on our body's natural ability to detoxify is going to be really important, because what we want to be able to do is, as we're being exposed to heavy metals, we want to be able to get rid of them in a timely manner so that they then don't have to build up in our organs. So, increasing things like your, particularly like cruciferous vegetables, onions, garlic. There's certain, garlic's been shown to reduce the absorption of certain heavy metals, making sure you're getting enough fiber, again, so that, if we're being exposed to heavy metals through our food supply, we're getting less of an absorption there. Eating organic where we can as well will just help, not just heavy metals, but just general chemical and toxins, because we've also got to think about the effect that, not necessarily just heavy metals, but other chemicals you're exposed to, because all of those things are going to make detoxifying more difficult. Whether it's detoxifying heavy metals or whether it's other chemicals. So it's reducing your exposure of all chemicals as well, filtering your water, so not getting exposure through there, and as well making sure that just your general nutrient levels are optimal in the body, because, as I said, certain things like zinc or iron or selenium can actually block the effects of the heavy metals, because they have that sort of blocking relationship. And then as well, making sure that you're getting enough antioxidants in the food that you eat, potentially supplementing with antioxidants if necessary, because a large part of why heavy metals are damaging to the body is by causing high levels of oxidative stress or oxidative damage. So we want to be protecting the body at the same time.
Yeah, that's totally fair enough. All right, and what else? Do we need anything else about heavy metals that you think we need to cover? I guess what I'm hearing is, as we said, prevention better than cure. If you have been exposed, a good healthy diet rich in fibre and antioxidants. So, step one, and then having a test, maybe doing blood and urine, which is, or, hair and urine or whatever it is. I often run the two just to get a good idea of levels. And then working with the physician to chelate it out while making sure you protect kidney function and those sort of things. Is there anything else you wanted to add to any of that? Anything we've missed that we haven't covered that should absolutely be spoken about when it comes to all things heavy metal?
No, just probably that last point, that if you do have a test or, you do believe you've been exposed to heavy metals, then work with a health practitioner for the chelation side of things, because if you're not doing it properly, you can potentially go on and cause more damage. So just making sure that you're doing that. And I guess as well, just, to have that, consider, and I guess this, definitely something I recommend for people who have kidney disease, but there's been no identified cause. So they don't have diabetes, they don't have high blood pressure, they haven't had a whole lot of urinary tract infections, they don't have an autoimmune condition, but they have kidney disease and no one knows why. So definitely consider whether potentially heavy metals have been the cause there, and then obviously test and treat as needed.
That's a great point, and thank you for bringing that up, because you're absolutely right. Heavy metals in a unknown cause of chronic kidney disease is definitely something to check, because it may be the cause for someone who just really can't clear properly. So thank you for saying that. Perfect. All right. Well, I'll put a link to an article Emily wrote about heavy metals in the section below if you want more information. If you think you've been exposed to heavy metals and you want to have a test, you can reach out to Emily and she can organise that for you if you're part of our Kidney Disease Solution program. Otherwise, talk to your healthcare practitioner. Heavy metals are quite easy to test for. It will just be an integrative doctor or a naturopathic doctor that will run those tests rather than a standard regular GP test. In Australia, those tests vary in price from anywhere from about $80 for a hair mineral analysis all the way up to sort of $300-400 for a plasma and urine combination for the test. So the testing really varies in price there, but maybe worth doing. So hopefully you've liked this video and you've got a better understanding of all things heavy metals and why we talk about them in kidney disease and why there's something to consider. So if you've liked the video, make sure you hit like and hit subscribe, and that way you'll know anytime we put up a new video. If you need any more information about the Kidney Coach and who we are, head over to www.kidneycoach.com. If you were interested in the Kidney Advanced supplement that I spoke about there, that's got alpha-lipoic acid and N-acetylcysteine in good levels there and in the right form for kidney function, they're all available on the website. And I think that's it. And Emily, thank you again for your wisdom and knowledge and sharing with our community. And hopefully you are all heavy metal free. So enjoy the rest of your day wherever you're tuning in from. Thank you for being part of our community. And leave us a comment and let us know what you think. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks, Emily.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.